Good morning, friends. Today we are going to talk about deadheading. And deadheading is the process of removing spent blooms from rose bushes. And what deadheading does is promote your roses to rebloom. So, as most of us are growing roses that repeat, and repeat means they repetitively bloom throughout the growing season. Okay, so since most of us have our first flush ending, this is late May, now is a good time to deadhead. Now, I will say there are different types of rose gardeners. There are rose gardeners who come out every single day and deadhead the spent blooms as they become tired. And then there are rose gardeners who will wait until the entire flush is done blooming and then they will deadhead. I think it depends on just how much time you have, how perfect you want your garden to look. Sometimes you'll see that there's, like really kind of ugly older blooms on the plant while fresh blooms are blooming. It's just the way it is. They don't all bloom at the same time. As you can tell, we still have buds here. Okay, so the reason that I am deadheading today is not because my first flush is over. Well, maybe it is. But it is because we have had really gross, wet, marine layer weather. In the area that I live in Southern California, we are very close to the Pacific Ocean, and we get a marine layer that comes through in May and June. And it's typically not very sunny. The fog just gets trapped in this area and does not typically go away until noon or 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And temperatures are not that warm. I would say high 50s, low 60s, sometimes mid 60s. So my first flush is a bust. Let's just say that. My plants have been sprayed for mildew and for pests, but because of this nasty weather we've had, I definitely have like a whole bunch of gross going on. It just is what it is. And by the way, this is Pope John Paul hybrid tea rose. In the summer, when it is dry here and sunny, it is magnificent. So this rose typically looks amazing for us all the way from, let's say, like late June through December, but in the spring, not so much. Okay, so as the gardener, you have the choice, like I said, to either deadhead as the blooms start to become spent and wilt away, or you can wait until your plant is completely done flushing and then deadhead them. So we're just gonna say here that this plant is done flushing, and I'm gonna come through and I'm gonna cut out all the spent blooms. You're gonna notice that I'm gonna leave some buds at the top. These buds most likely will rot, just like the rest of my blooms have. But for good measure, I'm gonna leave them because that would just be so sad, and I'd get a lot of comments from you guys about cutting off good buds. So we'll just see what happens. But knowing the weather here, it's not gonna be cute. So, so if you're gonna just cut out like the terminal bud, so the terminal bud is your center bloom. I'm gonna take this down. Pretend like this is still attached to the plant. If you're gonna cut out your terminal bloom that has already been spent, you're just going to cut out the middle, and then this would remain on the plant to continue to bloom. Typically, we put all of our deadheading material into a bucket and put it in the trash. We personally do not compost our spent blooms because roses contain pests, disease, and it's not really what we want to put back into the soil. So that's your choice. I'm all about like composting leftover fruits and vegetables, but my personal opinion is with rose bushes, and especially because they do carry pests and disease, not the greatest. So just my opinion. So anyway, I'm gonna come through here and I'm gonna show you how to deadhead. So let's get a bloom here. Now you will notice that the first 2 leaflets on the plant are 3 leaves each, okay? And actually this plant has all 3. There aren't any 5s until way down. So basically what you want to do is you want to cut deep enough that you are cutting into like a thicker area of the stem. And again, there are a lot of different techniques to deadheading. There are different opinions on deadheading. My general opinion is that you want to cut deep enough to where the stem is thicker, because keep in mind with roses and any other plant, nothing thicker. So a stem thicker than this one is not going to come out of this stem. So you're only going to get a new thicker stem, which is a healthier stem, right? Less flimsy, bigger bloom. So the thicker the stem, the bigger the bloom. You're going to get that from a deeper bud eye than you are up at the top, right? So I have in the past been like when I've had a new plant and I haven't really wanted to cut deep into her, I have been the type to just cut off the top bloom, pinch it off. And if you want to do that, that's totally fine. Like if your plant is young and you don't want to cut, 6 inches into the plant, if that kind of hurts your heart, if that makes you feel, oh, the plant's going to be really small and not have a lot to it anymore, then don't do it. You can just cut off your spent blooms and the plant will be perfectly fine. But the general rule of thumb is where you're cutting at the first 5 set leaflet, okay? The train of thought is there that if when you do that, you're cutting deep enough into the plant where that first bud eye that's going to come out and produce your stem is going to be thick and healthy. If you're cutting just off the top of the plant where it's very thin, the neck of the bloom, you're going to get a thinner, less like developed stem with a smaller bloom. Does that make sense? I hope it does. But it's really up to you as the gardener. Like, you know your plants, and if your bush is only, 12 inches tall right now, and it's, really tiny, and if you just want to pinch off your spent blooms on the top, pinch them off or cut them off, you can do that, okay? Like, if that's what you think your plant needs in order to remain full, and it'll still push new growth. And remember, the act of deadheading, the act of removing the top growth, the spent blooms, will promote the plant to re-bloom. If I came back to this plant in about a week, I would see brand new red growth shooting out from where I deadheaded that would look actually just like this. Okay, so I'm just gonna go down the line here. I don't have a bucket with me, so I'm gonna throw them behind me and then we'll come through and we will pick them up. But let me show you what the plant is gonna look like after I clean her up. So I've got about 5 plants cleaned up here. I did go ahead and leave the healthy buds. We will see what happens with them. Our weather is not expected to get any nicer, so my gut feeling tells me they will rot like the rest of the blooms did on these plants, but I left them for now and we'll see what they look like in a few days. These bushes, like I said, do have quite a bit of foliar disease right now, issues, because our weather has been so bad and no amount of spraying of fungicides would have helped it. It's just the way it is sometimes. So I know a lot of you message us about, oh, my foliage looks terrible, what's wrong with it? And it's always going to be Mother Nature. It's either going to be pests, which are brought on by Mother Nature, or weather, and it's just something we have to live with. In general, I know because I've grown this rose for 7 years, almost 8 years, I think. This rose looks fabulous for us after this first flush. So we just have to get through this first spring, wet, gross time of the year for us. And then she'll be really beautiful in the summer. Her foliage will be clean. All of the foliage that is diseased will drop off by itself. Now, we could come through when we're deadheading, and many people do, and we could remove the diseased or pest infected foliage. Perfectly fine to do that. I wouldn't suggest removing all the foliage off your plants because they do need foliage for protection, but keep in mind that any foliage that is diseased tends to fall off on its own, and then you would just want to sweep it away. Eventually it will. So again, this is the bushes cleaned up, deadheaded, and like I said, you can go deeper if you want. It's really your choice as to how much you take off your plants when you do the deadheading process. There's no hard and fast rule. Just gauge your plant, how big it is, how thick the stems are, and go from there. And if you want to leave on some buds, that's perfectly fine too.